In this tutorial, we are going to start working on our header and putting in our header elements, which is our logo and our nav bar. In this case, we're just going to lay out some of the basic properties of our header and put in our logo, and then in the next tutorial, we will put in the scroll function that allows our header to stick and then shrink. And then following that tutorial, we will start working on our nav bar. So before we actually put in any content, we're actually going to style a lot of this ahead of time. So I'm going to start with kind of the same thing up here where we have our page styles. I'm going to do the same thing with our header styles. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the enter return key. I'm going to do this about 4 times because I actually have some items that I want to put in above that, but that actually come later. And the reason why I like to do it this way is because those styles tend to be stuff that I use over and over again. So for me, like, I know it doesn't seem like it's in the right order, but that's kind of the way I like to organize my style sheet. So I'm going to copy and paste this page style little header piece that we put up in here earlier with our styling. And I'm just going to grab that and then hit Command C or Control C to copy that. And then down here on line 36, I'm going to paste that in. Where it says page styles, I'm going to change that from page to header styles. Okay. And then I'm going to hit the enter return key a couple more times after that. And then so I had to save some time here, I'm going to copy and paste this where it says global page attributes. I'm going to grab that, copy that, and then paste it down here in line 42. But instead of global page attributes, what this is going to be our mobile styles. And we have to set this up. So we basically have to set up when we're doing a responsive design, we basically have to set up 2 different designs, one for mobile and one for desktop. Now that might sound like a lot of work, and in some ways it can be depending upon your design, but the cool thing is that with design, if we design from a mobile first strategy, it actually becomes a lot easier designing for like a bigger page, for like a desktop or a laptop. So that's why we always start with mobile first. We always start with kind of like a tube model, and then we expand it from there. But believe it or not, a lot of the styles that we will employ for mobile will transfer over into a laptop or desktop version. So don't worry about that being like a lot of extra work. Okay, so after that, place my cursor right after that /, and then I'm going to hit the enter return key. So what we're going to do is we need to create a container, a header container, and I like to call these wraps because they kind of act like an outside wrapper. And this is going to be a class, so we're going to type in a period first, and we're going to type in header dash wrap, and then open up a curly brace. And we want the width of our header to be 100%, so it spans the width of our screen in a mobile view. Our position is going to be fixed, and this is what's going to enable it to be sticky, so it doesn't go anywhere as we scroll down. And then we need to tell it, when we tell it to be fixed, we need to tell it to be fixed at the top. So top equals 0 or top colon 0, and then semicolon. Here is where you can decide what you want your design to look like. This is going to be a background. I'm going to set my background color. And for me, this is actually what I'm going to do is background color. And for this one, I'm going to use a hexadecimal number. In some of our other styles that we will be doing, we'll actually be just using named colors, and we're going to use a combination of hexadecimal numbers, named colors, and RGB colors in this tutorial, so you get familiar with the different ways of adding and making color for your site. Next, we need to put in what's called a Z index, and the reason why we do this is because what will happen is because our header is a sticky header, and when we scroll, all of our content will scroll, but our header will stay at the top. If we don't put in a Z index, what's going to happen is our header will get pushed below whatever content is scrolling. So I like to put in a Z index of something that's really large. It doesn't really matter. You can actually put in a Z index of 1, but we just want to be safe. So I usually put in an index value of 1,000 and just use big numbers. It's just kind of like one of those standards that we see in web design, and it just makes it easier to determine where your order is in your Z index. Okay, so from there, inside of our header wrap, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then I'm going to pop over to our source code and start building some of this as we go along here, so you can see how we're going to nest everything inside of each other. So where my body tag is and my cursor is placed, I'm going to hit the enter return key and then type in a left caret, and this is going to be what's called a header. Now what's cool about HTML5 is that there are named headers, and in fact some of this will work for HTML4, but there are named tags that we can use for structural elements, and so we don't have to use div every time. So I'm going to start with the header tag and hit the space bar, and this is going to be header class and then header wrap. And then I hit the right caret there and close that out. And then with my cursor in between the two, I'm going to hit the enter return key one time there. So I have my nesting started. So that's going to be the wrap, the kind of the wrap around the outside that holds it all together. And the reason we're going to do this later on, it'll become clear as to why we do this. If we don't do this, then we won't be able to set up our max width centering option for a really large screen. So that's why we're nesting it in this way. So I'm going to click back over to our style sheet, and then the next tag that's going to go inside of the header wrap is our actual header. So I'm going to type in period and then header. So this will be another class. And then here's where we're going to deviate a little bit from other types of designs that we've done. We're going to use what's called a CSS grid layout. So I'm going to hit my curly brace and hit enter return. And in this case, we have to type in display and grid. So the way I want you to think about this now, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but grid layout is a really powerful way of laying out your web page. Think of it as like a table in Microsoft Excel. When you're creating, when you create a design, think of your elements being laid out in a grid based on columns and based on rows. You can make the grid as large as you want. You don't want to go too much though, because it kind of gets kind of crazy. But most standard grid layouts are a 12 column layout. They're not always 12 column. You can actually make them smaller. You can make them larger. I've seen grids up to 16 columns before, but typically they are done in 12 column increments or 12 column layouts. We will do a combination of 12 and we will do a combination of 3 to make it easier for you guys to understand grid layout. For the header, we're going to actually do a 12 column layout, and some of you are probably thinking, well, wait a minute, if we have 12 columns in our header, but there are only 2 elements in our header, how are we going to position those things, and how is that going to look? Well, what's cool about the grid layout is we can span those columns. Just like if we were in Word, we can span a column by merging cells and things like that. It works works in the same way in CSS grid. So we have to set this up, display grid, we have to tell it how many grid columns we want, and consequently we also have to tell it how many rows we want, but in this case we only have 1 row, so we don't need to worry about that right now. So we're going to do it in a grid. We're going to type in grid template, and what you're going to find is code hinting does not work in Dreamweaver for grid columns. So you need to type in grid template columns. You'll see that it is purple by the time you're done with it. So hit the colon key right after that, and then follow this. We need to repeat our columns. Okay, open up a parenthesis, and we're going to repeat these 12 times. So we're going to repeat 12 columns, type in a column or type in a comma, And just in case we want to use this later, we can. We are going to name, sorry, not curly brace, brackets. We're going to name our columns COL for column. Okay, so if we want to specify we want to put something in column number 6, we would need to do so by calling it a name. So that's what we're doing with this call in brackets. We're calling each one of these columns a call. Column for short. So that'll allow us to call up a specific column later on if we want to. Now each column is going to be worth 1 fraction. So what this is going to allow us to do is essentially divide up our page into 12 equal fractions. So you can see the beauty of how this might work later on. What that means is no matter what size of device that we're looking at our design in, it will divide that page into 12 equal columns. So we have to kind of give up some of our control here. Then that's what the cool thing about this design is, that we're not doing a fixed layout. We're not doing a fixed width layout. So we have to give up some of our control of that and kind of be okay with the fact that we may not know exactly what it's going to look like in any kind of screen size. We can kind of predict it, but it might look slightly different from one screen to the next. And that's okay, because really we want our design to actually fit and mimic those screens, and that's really important. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Save or Command Save, and then we're going to pop back over into our HTML source code here, and I'm going to go ahead and nest our header class, and this time I'm going to use a div. So left caret div class header, and then right caret there, and then hit the enter return key. So we have our nesting going on. So you should see header wrap and then header. Okay, and next we're going to put in our logo. And I'm going to pop back over to our style sheet here. And underneath that last header style I put in, I'm going to hit the enter return key. And we're going to name this div class, or the next div container that's going to go inside of our header. We're going to name that logo. So period, LOGO, and then curly brace. And then what we're going to do is we're going to type in grid column, just like that. So it should be purple in mine, and hit the colon. Okay, and we're going to position this logo in, I'm sorry, I'm typing that over again, grid column, colon. It's going to be in the first column. So we're just going to put it in number 1. Okay, and then to make sure that, because we're going to have 2 elements in this area, in this header, in this row, we need to hit the enter return key, and we're going to tell it that we want it to be in grid row colon 1 and then semicolon. Okay, so that's all we need to do for our logo positioning right there. Okay, for now. I'm going to pop back over to our source code, and then inside of our div class header right there, we're going to put in our logo. So left caret div class equals logo, and then hit the right caret. Okay, so right now we've got 3 nested divs, 3 nested containers within each other. That's our structure so far on the header. And here's where we're going to insert our logo. Before I insert the logo, I want to actually create a link to our logo. I could do this after inserting a logo, but I'm just going to do it this way. So we're going to make sure that our logo will be a button to our home page. So I'm going to type in href, and then enter return, and then enter return again when we hit the browse button. And you're just going to link that to your index page. So I'm going to go into my portfolio and select index, and then hit the right caret, and then you should see the A tag close out. In between my link that I just created there, I need to insert the logo, and our logo is an image. So I'm going to type in our left caret, and then type in img src. Oops, Control Z that. img src, and then hit the enter return key a couple times to browse for it. And then I need to select my images folder. you're going to notice that I have a bunch of images in here already. It's because I've already created this design, mocked it up before doing this tutorial. And so I have all my images in here already. You may not have all of your images ready to go for this tutorial, but you should have your logo set up. So mine's called the One Column Design logo. So I'm just going to hit open there, and then I'm going to hit the space bar. So I type in the Alt key, and in here this is going to be, I'm going to name this One Column Design logo. You would want to put like your name, logo, or whatever. And then after that quotation mark there, you need to put the / and then the right caret. We will need to come back and add a couple of things to this in our next tutorial when we add our shrinking and scrolling function for our header. But for now, we're just going to leave it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command S, and here I think is a good time to preview our design. So down here in the right hand column, we should see a real-time preview icon button. So click on that, and we need to preview this in Google Chrome. And remember, the reason why we want to preview this in Google Chrome is so that we can see what our design will look like in the views that we're trying to do. So right now you'll notice that my logo is all the way over to the left, and it's in a really large screen right now. And we haven't looked at our desktop or a laptop styling yet for our header. So we need to look at that in our mobile view. So I'm going to go up to View, go to Developer and Developer Tools. And then here we should be in something like Galaxy S5. If you want to look at it in iPhone 6 or iPhone 5, they're similar to a Galaxy S5, but I think they're just a little bit larger in terms of their screen size. So now we can kind of see how this might start turning out. It's sticky, but right now it doesn't do anything in terms of scrolling down or anything like that. You won't be able to see it until we get content in there for you to really check that out. So we are going to preview this in our mobile view for the time being. So I'm going to tab over, Control Tab or Command Tab over to Dreamweaver again. And so then the next thing we need to do is we need to put in our we're going to go ahead and style for our media screen that's a little bit larger than a phone. So I'm going to tab over to our style sheet here, and I'm going to copy where I have mobile, that little mobile comment out, and I'm going to Command C, Control C, and then I'm going to hit the Enter Return key, and then I'm going to paste that in there. And so instead of mobile, I'm going to type in desktop. So here's where you get to play with, finally, you get to play with this feature of 2 different design options versions for 2 different screens. Now, we're only going to do 2. Some designers will do up to 3, sometimes even 4 different screen sizes. One for mobile, one for tablets, and sometimes you have different tablet sizes, one for laptop, and then maybe even one for a really large screen. We're keeping this simple, and we're only designing basically for 2 sizes. And the way I figure this is that if you're looking at our site on a tablet's resolution is pretty good, and for the most part you can see the design in that way. So we're not going to worry about what a tablet size might look like. We're just going to mainly target a mobile phone and a desktop or a laptop. So we start this out by using the @ symbol, and we're going to type in @media, and then we type in screen, and we type in and. So we can actually target resolution. We can target screen sizes. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We're just going to keep it really simple, and we're going to do @media screen and then type in a parenthesis, and we're going to do this as a minimum width. Okay. Now this might be confusing. It's not a maximum width. We're doing a minimum width because we're starting our design with we're starting our strategy design from a mobile base. And so what we're doing is we're saying anything that's larger than 700 pixels. So I typed in a colon there, minimum width : 700 pixels. So anything larger than 700 pixels, that's what that minimum width means. If we were doing it from the reverse, if we were designing from a desktop first and then going down to mobile, we would start with a maximum width, and then that would kind of go in the reverse. So we're doing this from a mobile version first, and so what we're saying here is when the screen is a minimum width of 700 pixels, you're going to do this instead. So after that parentheses, that closing parenthesis, you're going to open up a curly brace. Now here's what's going to get tricky with our styling in this. What we're saying is this is kind of like, think of this as kind of like its own container right here. So when we're saying at media screen and minimum width, okay, you're going to do something. So all of the styles within this little caveat, this little, say, inquiry, is going to apply those styles. We're going to end up with what's kind of some nested brackets in here. So just be mindful of that and don't accidentally delete one of those brackets because you'll break your style sheet. So what we're doing here is we're targeting the header again. Okay. And so again, and then we have to open up that curly brace. That's what I was just talking about here. So hit the enter return key. So you see how we're nesting inside. And when I do this, you'll notice that I started that style at media screen on the very left and I tabbed in, and we have now that tabbed in piece. So that helps me visually see that this header, this style is falling within this inquiry. So at a minimum width of 700 pixels. Here's where we're going to say max width. Max width. And this is where we're going to put 1920 pixels. And the reason why I'm picking 1920 pixels is because that's typically what you might see for a really nice high resolution screen. So 1920 pixels. And then for height, we're just going to do, and then this is kind of redundant, but I'm going to put height as inherent. And then margin is going to be 0 and auto. So what this is going to do, we're saying at this width, okay, at this width, when it gets this large, okay, under this width, basically, you're going to set our page to be 0 and auto. And the reason why we do this is this will auto center our page within the screen. So that's what happens. So let's go ahead and preview this. I'm going to go ahead and save this and show you what this looks like. Pop over to our source code here. And we don't have to hit this little preview button every time. This is kind of the new feature of the live preview. If we just click back over and hit refresh, we should see our design update in real time. If I unclick this and get out of developer mode, what you're going to see is now my logo is over here. It's no longer over here. And the reason for that is because what I've done is I've set that max width to 1920 pixels. Now you can't see it because my background image is spanning that, or that background color is spanning that 100% width of our page. But you can see why it positioned it over here. Okay. If I make this smaller, what it's going to do is it's going to stop at a certain point and it's going to make it smaller. Okay. And it's just going to, so if we get out to that, see how it spans out? That's because at that point, that's where there's a breakpoint. That's the 1920 pixel breakpoint where it brings our design in and automatically centers it within our page. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so I think we're almost done with this first part of the tutorial. And one thing before we get to our next section, I want to go ahead and pop in a class, a div container for our navigation. And I'm only going to do this just to put it in here for now. We're not going to style it just yet, but I want to kind of build out the structure of our header so you can see where this is going to go. So after our div class logo, and place my cursor right after that closing div tag, and I'm going to hit the enter return key, and I'm going to type in div class, and this class is going to be what's called a primary dash nav dash wrap. Okay, and then hit your cursor right at the end of there and hit the right caret and hit the enter return key, so we have a space there to put in more for space for our nav to go in there. I just want to place this as a placeholder for now because that's what's going to build out the structure of our header. In not the next tutorial, but the tutorial after, we will start building out our nav bar, our nav button, and that'll be a pretty long tutorial to get that to get through all of that. Okay. So that will take care of us for now in this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to add that JavaScript function that will allow our header to shrink and grow as a user scrolls. Don't forget to Command S or Control S before you move on to the next step.